We're human, don't you know? Just like you are. I'm Rachel Woods, HRBP turned HR coach, and in this series, I explore the technicolor spectrum that is life in HR with folk in the know. Those that have been there, bought the t-shirt, and are happy to share their experiences for us all to benefit. So grab a cuppa, get comfortable, and we'll crack on. I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Beaumont today. And for those of you who don't know Andrew yet, like many of us, he has a thing for HR. Following a successful career as a people manager in banking, he transferred to corporate HR within the same industry, found his calling. He went on to head up departments both in the UK and overseas. And then he made the decision to depart from corporate HR and set up his own private consultancy even, sorry about that, which has included bespoke HR solutions for businesses in the martial arts industry of all things. So Andrew is an advocate for regarding staff as a company's biggest asset, and he publicly states that he does not do pink and fluffy, and we'll get to that later. Andrew and I got chatting recently about the evolution of skills in HR, in particular commerciality, and it's way more interesting than it sounds, I promise. It's what we're going to discuss today after a big fat We're Human welcome to you, Andrew. Hello.
Hey, Rachel. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's very, very good to see you here. Before we get into the meat of all of this, I ask all my guests to do a little bit of a flashback, wind back the clock, and tell us what got you into HR in the first place.
My route in was quite unusual, and as you just mentioned kindly in the bio, my background was financial services, and when I was at college I always wanted to go into banking. It was the one thing I wanted to do, and then when I was in the people management role, I started as a new people manager, started to create a lot of cases via the HR portal for advice I needed. And HR in that organisation worked in the same building as I did, and just built up a very good relationship with them. And a couple of years into the role, they actually recruited for a full-on HR role, and I applied for it and got it. So with no HR background, I ended up in a nationwide HR employee relations role.
Blimey, gosh, did you decide to kind of train, or was this kind of on the job and having a mentor or something? Or
a lot of it was on the job. I took the decision to do my CIPD in the evening because apart from that team of 6 people, I'd got no HR network. My professional network at that stage was very much financial services. So I did CIPD in the evening, professional qualification. And a lot of it was on the job training. My line manager at the time was very good, very knowledgeable around all things HR. But yes, kind of took it from there. Wasn't ever a field I was ever expecting to go into, but just fell in love with it.
Yeah, wow, okay, it's interesting, isn't it? I'm kind of with you in the whole falling into HR thing. I didn't target it as a career and fell in, and then felt the need, well, maybe I ought to go and get a qualification to feel credible. I think that was half of it. But well, I mean, at the time, what was your perception of HR? What was I'm trying to get to where pink fluff comes from. What was your perception of HR at the time?
I think yeah, because at that stage we were it was huge corporates. At that stage I was with HSBC, so in a people management role, and very much thought that HR were there kind of when you had issues with your people, but very much saw them as a reactive department. So I don't know what to do with this situation has happened, I know I'll go to HR. And I think that sits in a little bit with the size of the organisation. So in big organisations, HR can so often be reactive, but they also can be quite risk adverse because of the size of the organisations, and there's an expectation that they will have more room to be able to adjust working patterns or whatever it might be. So you only, it's the old adage about you don't know what you don't know, and that was my first experience of HR. It was only when I left HSBC, and I'd been there almost 20 years when I left, So I'd known very little else other than HSBC. But it's only when I left there that I realised HR is very different between sectors, between company sizes.
Yeah, yeah. And so what have you seen since? I mean, where have you seen it? I guess it's in terms of the spectrum of highly commercial, I'm sorry to keep harping on about this, very anti-pink fluff versus the sort of HR you describe as maybe being a bit tissues and issues. Is that the kind of the pink fluffy version of HR that you're alluding to, or?
Yeah, I think so. And there's been challenges. Have had challenges on LinkedIn previously about the whole pink and fluffy thing and the not pink and fluffy. And that the whole reason about that is the fact that HR can so often be seen as completely on the employee side, and that the employer has to jump through hoops to be able to get to be able to make the decision that's actually right for the business. And as I've come away from the commercial corporate side of it a little bit, you start to understand that actually, if HR is done right, if people are recruited the right way, if you've got the right people around you, actually the staff will do so much to grow the business because they're engaged. And it's that whole entire employee life cycle that I think got missed in the corporate world. So if you can start to take people on an employee journey, that starts in the recruitment process with the contract of employment and all of that, and right the way through, and get them to understand that they matter, actually you're going to save yourself a lot less problems at the back end. But I also think that no matter how much you do all of that, and no matter how much you do the treating people the right way, sometimes the more hires you make, you're going to hire somebody who's not right for your organization at some point. Be it gut instinct, be it wrong, be it them talking well in the interview, whatever it might be. And at that point, there's a need to just resolve it quickly. Still do it the right way, because at the end of the day, you're dealing with an individual. But I'm a very firm believer that if you've got the wrong person in the business, if they're not right for your business, you and the individual need to part ways.
Yeah, and I actually don't disagree with you on that front. Actually, you've given me my own flashback actually then around, we were recruiting for a particular role. It was a clinical role. And the young lady that came and was interviewed for that was amazing, absolutely incredible. And the young lady we got that started was completely different. Looked like the same person, talked like the same person. What they were saying was not the same, but the accent and all the rest of it. What we found out later down the line, actually, and we did part ways quite quickly, is we found that they were twins. So one had done the interview and one had got the job.
Right.
Really interesting. But obviously that's pretty rare. And you're right, outside of that, I think that's quite fluky, isn't it? When you get that particular instance, I would hope it never happens again anywhere else. But I can see that, yeah, folk do come to interview and are a certain way. There's people that interview incredibly well.
Yes.
But actually, when they get into doing the do, it turns out that actually, yes, okay, they might not be right for the job, but equally, the job's probably therefore not right for them.
Yeah, and I think the opposite of that is also true, Rachel, about the fact that so often candidates can be rejected for roles that they would have been great at because of performance in interview.
Yeah.
And this is where gut instinct is such a powerful tool, but also this is where people management being a skill comes in, because actually so often in organizations, people are in people management roles because they've been there the longest, or they know the most about the business. They've never been trained how to manage people or to what to look for.
Yeah, you've got then the whole promotion from peer to manager dynamic, and the support or lack of that goes with that. when oh, well, you're a manager now, here you'll say yes because we'll pay you more, but actually once you realize when you're in the role how much work it's going to take, you may or may not want to be there. You may or may not want to commit to the extra learning and self-reflection and admitting to yourself the failings. I hate to use the word failings, but the development areas that you have, which are going to be uncomfortable to get over in order to be effective in that space.
Yes.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? That's the big challenge, particularly peer to manager, because it's going from being amongst your mates potentially to being in charge and having to pass on difficult messages or take tricky decisions or make assessments and pass judgment on your previous peers. And that's, an uncomfortable place to be. So what have you noticed has changed? I mean, ultimately, that was your kind of formative experiences within HR, particularly, again, coming as being a people manager into that space. How have you noticed, I mean, has it evolved? What's different nowadays than then?
I think there's been a few things that I've noticed change significantly. I think we're far more aware about, as society and as companies, we're far more aware around the challenges around mental health and the need to deal with them. So, that 15 years ago, that wasn't where it is now. There's clearly still a lot of work to be done, but I think business owners, HR departments are a lot more aware around that. I think we're becoming naturally a more diverse workforce. People are living people are living longer. So we're becoming naturally more diverse anyway, and business owners and workforces and colleagues are all getting used to having a more diverse environment around them. I think probably the biggest change I've seen is the move towards remote working, and then the challenges about trying to move from remote back to office based, because on the back of COVID, everywhere, as we know, the world shut down. Those, my clients that could work remotely did. But then the whole piece around, you've been at home for 2 years, let's get you back into the office. So that was another challenge. But that whole process for me was absolutely fascinating, because prior to COVID, so many organizations didn't want their staff working from home.
I know, right? We can't do it. It's not possible. It's inconvenient, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly COVID hits. Everyone needs to go home. It's like, we'll set you up. We can make it work. It'll do. We'll do it. Let's keep business going. Let's all pull together. You think, you absolute bloody hypocrites.
And suddenly we can't trust you to work from home, but actually
now we can't. No, there's no COVID. Come back.
Absolutely. You've been more productive over the last 2 years than you've ever been in your working life, but we still want you back in the business.
So we can keep an eye on you.
And it's these kind of things, Rachel, that are so fundamental to me. This is the whole thing about, at the end of the day, that's an individual. It's and working from home isn't right for everybody. Working from an office isn't right for everybody, but equally, you can't, in most cases, have a broad rule. You can't have a rule for everybody. This is where knowing staff as individuals comes in.
And also, this is it, when we're talking, obviously, office workers here, where this is a very practical thing to do, as opposed to factories and catering and hospitality and the like way. Of course, you have to be present at the workplace, but it does, there's a lot of ironies in the last 2 years that have become really obvious. And there are some organizations that have done this extremely well. Let's get it, let's be fair to them. And we are giggling and pointing and laughing at the ones that have done it badly and that are being hypocritical. And there are some that have done very well out of this and are still recognizing the benefits of the hybrid working model. And they may have downsized their offices, but they've still got offices if people want to be together. They've got much better working, remote working arrangements, and think, wow, great. So the work-life blend for people, can and has for some improved. I guess the danger is for some it hasn't, and like you say, it's not right for everybody. And I guess there's also that piece around, although it might be convenient for somebody to want to work from home, it's not working for the organization. Sometimes that doesn't work well. And I know I did work for an organization that was actually quite helpful in terms of people working remotely prior to COVID, actually, not in all roles, but in some roles. But ultimately, we still had to have awkward conversations where they were working remotely to avoid childcare, but couldn't do their job because they had a 2-year-old running around in the background.
Yep.
Can't focus on either work or the 2-year-old, and it's not fair on anyone at that point. Yep. When toddler needs support, needs your attention, your work is there, and needs to be done. And ultimately, it just adds to stress on the individual because they're then trying to please everyone in every way as far as possible, and something has to give. Unfortunately, it's usually the work, because obviously you wouldn't ever want them to neglect a toddler. Yeah. But those are difficult conversations to have. And it's flexible working. There's working remotely and there's remotely working, and those two kind of sides of things. So you can kind of see where some organizations come from, and that paranoia kind of kicks in. It's not fair, it's not a reasonable assumption, but you can kind of see where it comes from.
Yeah, and from a HR side, it is incredibly naive to think that you can trust all of your employees all of the time, because that's not the way the world is. But I think what the last few years have shown is that there are more good employees than bad ones. But one of the challenges I've had with clients as we were coming, being COVID, coming out of it, was all about the because everything was reopening at different times, and the rules around grandparents and seeing each other and all of that kind of stuff were constantly changing depending on where you live. And you get clients phoning up and saying, I need this individual coming back into the office, but they're turning around and saying they can't come back because they've got no childcare. So I want to dismiss them. And you just think, but if they've got no childcare, they're still not going to be able to come in. It's not as though there's anything you can do there that will resolve that. They're not, as a parent, if they're not going to not able to leave the child at home, they're not able to leave them at home. And again, this is the whole, this is where the ability to get to know your people and treat them as individuals will pay you back handsomely, because and this is where the corporates and the commercial world is a little bit too big to be able to do this. But if you as a leader in the business get to know all of your staff and know what they're up to outside of work, this is where you can do one thing for one individual and a different thing for somebody else. And within the smaller businesses, this is an absolute luxury that they have, this ability to get to know every member of staff as an individual, because the big corporates can't do this, they're too big.
And there's an irony in that, isn't there? The big corporates don't have the capacity to get to know everyone, because like you say, they're too huge, they're too gigantic. And then it's down to the managers and to get to know their teams. I think that's it's left then to the managers, which is fine. I think that's a perfectly acceptable thing. But the irony is that the big corporates don't know their individual people, yet they can afford to enable certain ways of working and things, and more flexible patterns and leave and all the rest of it, which is great, again, for the individual, for the worker. Small organizations can absolutely get to know their people really, really well and empathize with them and absolutely understand them at a really personal level, which is a lovely thing, because they get really kind of connected, engaged, motivated. And yet when something happens, it could be, if you're in a very small business, you could be talking 1/8 of their workforce when one person's unable to come in that example you just gave. When that's happened in their life, I don't know, they've lost a loved one that was their childcare maybe, or they're a single parent now, or whatever that looks like. And much as the organization want to help and do something about that, commercially and financially and from a productivity and delivery perspective, what is the impact of losing that 1/8 of your workforce going to do to the bottom and top line of that organization, which might be incredibly tight?
Yes.
So much as if they worked for a giant corporation, it'd be great. Oh yeah, just have the time off until you get yourself back on your feet, or whatever they feel like doing, because they can feel like doing that should they choose to. Little one-man band with a few staff, what's their choice? What's their options? That's the irony in that situation, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I think the size of the corporates enables them to be able to look at things like, you know, wages or holidays or whatever it might be, whereas the smaller organizations, everything like that matters to them far more, because
the impact's huge.
Yeah, because actually it can be as serious as, you know, this could take us out of business. So for me, that's where the opportunity, this is where if you get to know the staff, if you keep them engaged, you know, if you know them as individuals, actually it's not all about money. You know, if they're getting treated the way they want to be treated, if they're getting looked after by their employer, the engagement can be such a massive tool, and it can negate, obviously circumstances are a bit different now with what's going on in the world, but in a lot of times it can negate the whole, you know what, I can't pay you as much as the corporates can, but actually I can do this, this and this, and have the little individual touches that the corporates can't do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, I think, you know, bringing this back to what HR's role in that is, like I say, with the corporate, you will have policies and things that are blanket across the organization, and you know, say, well, it's equitable because, you know, everybody can access this support. It might be that we've got childcare vouchers that we can offer, or we might even have an in-house creche, who knows, you know, there could be all that sort of stuff going on. For the small business, again, it's somewhat ironic again, isn't it, that they probably don't have in-house HR, so they probably have to go and pay for a consultant to come and help them with some of that stuff, should they want to go down that route. But I think from what you're saying, actually, they probably wouldn't necessarily need to go down get an external consultant in at the point in time where they just want to help someone out in a way that is realistic for the organization and fair on that particular individual. So the consultancy piece is almost light touch at that point, if they've got that right already, if they've got that engagement and knowledge right already.
Yeah, and it's another incredibly, you know, the whole as a business owner, the whole outsourcing and when you ask for help piece is so difficult to get right. As with a lot of things with setting a business up, there's legal bits around hiring employees. That you've got to get right, but fundamentally, if you understand that an individual who's coming to work for you, you know, needs to be treated the right way, needs to be looked after, and if you do that, they will give it you back in spades. It becomes easier to do. You know, if you just look at them and think, I need to hire somebody, you'll do, and then just forget about them, that's not necessarily going to work out very well.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right, Rachel, that you know, to also have a think about, well, I'm hiring my first employee, I know what, I'll pay for outsourced HR. That's not necessarily the first thought in your mind equally, you know, because everything's an additional cost when you're trying to keep your cost base down.
Yeah, definitely. But at the same time, the cost of getting it wrong could be massive. So
yes. Yeah. Equally. And but the cost of getting it right, you get this right, your business takes off, you need to hire a second person, a third person, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and every hire you get right, you're creating advocates, aren't you? You're creating people that will go out and practically start recruiting for you the next time you want to recruit, because they love working with you so much. They love the business, they love what they do.
And we know in most sectors at the moment, in most sectors, recruitment is still very, very candidate driven.
Do you find though, I think, and it's again, I think I'm flashing back to my kind of early days in HR, and actually somewhat through the middle of my career in some ways, you get so into doing the day job, so into doing the transactional stuff, doing getting on with it and all the rest of it, that you almost take your eye off the impact you have as an HR professional on the recruitment space. And again, I mean, you know, in medium to larger organizations, there's probably a separate recruitment person or team or group, or it's outsourced. But again, that planning for bringing people in the way that, you know, you've just described, that bringing them in, getting to know them, they go out, they become your advocates, and so on and so forth. The bigger you get, the harder that gets, obviously, because you'll start running out of friends and family and people who know people. But at the same time, HR's role in that also gets watered down by suddenly becoming very much, you know, ingrained in the keeping in the engine room, keeping the ship afloat, making sure contracts go out, all that kind of stuff. And then I don't think it's till you get more senior and you're in a bigger organization, you suddenly get back to being, actually, I can now be more strategic again, if I ever was in the first place. Because again, your first experience of HR may have been like yours and mine, big corporate. Big corporate, okay, that's how this works. This is the job, we do the do. And then the strategic part is almost a bit of a shock to the system. When you're suddenly going, oh, okay. And I know you and I were talking when we first met was around, you know, the skill sets that's now needed to be effective in a senior HR role versus, I think the skill sets you could get quite senior without having several years ago. And I've known senior HR people that I would not call financially or commercially savvy in any way, shape or form. They were very nice, very humanistic, very good people, but they didn't hold their own in the board meeting when the finance director was talking. Do you know what I mean? They weren't in that that space where they could have that meaningful debate, if you like. I wouldn't say arguments, but you know, and sometimes you disagree with a fellow board member, you need to have the debate. And because they didn't have that acuity, it wasn't there. So I mean, has the needs of organizations shifted, or is HR evolving, or none of the above? And what are you seeing nowadays from, you know?
I think the hardest organization from a HR side is kind of the 15 to 20 plus heads up to 50, 60, 70. So there's a sweet spot typically around 80 heads usually, where you can't outsource HR. Actually, you need HR within the business. And you know, post 100 heads, Rachel, there's an argument there that, and actually HR need a seat at the top table. But it's that bit in between, because you know the startup companies, you know, they've got the FSB, they've got the local chamber, etc. There's places where they can get covered with what they need to hire people, and that will do the job. And the 100 plus typically have got in-house HR, as you mentioned, potentially recruitment and training. It's that bit in the middle where the 20 heads want to get to 100 heads, but they haven't necessarily got the culture or the people around them to be able to grow them to where they need to be. And that's where HR have the opportunity to be proactive and to be able to work around the culture, to set, you know, to work to get, start even looking at, you know, putting managers in the business and start looking at succession planning and things like that would never potentially have happened before. Yeah,
and you're right. It's easy to think, actually, if I think about organizations that I know of now, my husband's in the construction industry, and you can imagine some of these organizations, they're relatively small when they start off. They could be family businesses that have grown, and they've got some land, they've built some sites, they're doing okay, they're turning over $1 million, maybe a bit more. But you say they've got maybe 15, 20 staff, and it's, I think the only one I've ever known that actually had an HR director basically promoted, I think an HR advisor, HR manager at best, into an HR director spot. Not what you would call board level. And I felt for her. I mean, she fell over big time. And that's a real shame, because actually that's an organization that had an opportunity there to start engaging with HR to build a culture, to help them create policies or ways of working, not even policies, but really get behind their values and really help them say, who are we recruiting? What are we recruiting for? Okay, it's all right, you can go out there and get the skills. Will you get the fit you want in terms of the organization that makes the difference you want to make in the world, and be known for the things you want to be known for? You won't get that if you're promoting someone who came in that you put in there to be transactional. And because she was very competent, very qualified to be transactional, don't suddenly ask this poor person to step up, be strategic, be this cultural lead without any support, training, leadership ability. So, I mean, people go through years and years of study and mentorship to get to that sort of level, to be able to advise on that sort of thing, to sort of promote the person that came in to do your contracts from templates that already existed. And isn't going to cut it.
I've seen organizations where as well in that 70, 80, 90 headspace, where they've actually brought HR under another department, or even worse, they've had a head of another department, typically customer relations, and they've just lifted and shifted into a head of HR role.
Wow, yeah.
Because they needed it in the structure chart. Because as we're growing, we need somebody in, but they didn't have, because it was all outsourced. Suddenly we need somebody in a head of HR role. I know what, we'll take the head of customer services and put them there. And this is where organizations sometimes do a disservice to HR, because if it's done right, it will add value to a business.
Yeah. Do you know, the only time I've seen that work, where a non-HR director has been appointed, or head of, I think it was a head of, has been appointed, was when they were appointed to lead a group of actually very, very competent HR experts, and came into that saying, I know I don't know anything about what you do specifically, employment law and all this other stuff that you're involved with. What I do understand is the nuts and bolts of this organization, how this works, how the financial pieces work, how the commerciality, how the insights work in terms of bringing things in. And I understand the organizational strategy inside and out. And the first words to us was, I need your help.
Yes.
I need your help to get the organizational strategy and the HR strategy as one. Because we know what you're doing, we know what you're working on. It's very, very, noble, and everything you want to do is very, very needy, and it all needs to happen. And it is loosely, linked to the organizational strategy as you understand it, as you've been told it. And the first thing she said was I need your help, because what you've been told isn't really the whole picture of the strategy, and therefore you're working from bits of information, and you're not working from the whole picture. So I want to give you the whole picture. And we just sat there and went, hallelujah. So at that point, we didn't care that the background wasn't HR as such, because actually they didn't need to get involved with employment law. They didn't need to be the escalation point for disciplinaries and grievances, because we had a big enough hierarchy that basically I was the escalation point for disciplinaries and grievances and like. So that worked. The system was that the HR team was competent as a HR function. What we needed was a voice on the board that could speak their language, and that's the role she played. It was fantastic. But you had to pick the right one that was willing to drop the ego and say, I know what I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I can see how, I can see how that would work if you've got the expertise underneath. And the knowledge there.
And again, only big organizations with a large HR team can probably get away with that.
Yes.
To go back to your point. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But if you are humble enough to come in and say, look, I'm leading this department, but I accept that you have more knowledge than I do, so effectively I will be the figurehead, if you like, of the department, but I need to tap into your knowledge base.
I've got your backs, I can talk the financials, but actually I trust you to know your jobs.
Yes.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's happy days that was. But you're right, actually, being brought into an organization that doesn't have that structure already, And like you say, promoting your head of customer services into an HR director role with maybe one HR administrator reporting into them, is not going to go well. And that poor administrator, it's just not going to stay there very long.
No, it's suddenly expected to know everything about HR.
Yeah. So I think we've gone through the gamut of the things that actually would be perceived as a bit pink and fluffy, to go back to that. In terms of that, our example of the mum that's struggling and all the rest of it, and the differences that they would have being in a big corporate versus being in a small organization. But I think we've just kind of touched on all of the colours in between, right the way through to the very hard-ass kind of dark way of, and I've certainly been in organisations before that were at the other end of the spectrum, if you like, the very, what I used to call hard-assed HR.
Yes.
Which you knew you needed a thick skin because you were asked to be obviously within the law, but to a point where it felt unethical.
The corporates, the commercials need HR because they're risk adverse typically, and and obviously tribunals, reputational risk, all of that kind of stuff. They almost can't afford to not have HR. I think the challenge with the smaller organisations is to understand why they need it. And the day the first tribunal arrives through the door isn't the point to think, oh, I better do something about HR, because chances are, if HR had been involved at the start, there may not have been a tribunal. Not in all cases.
No, I agree. I know, I absolutely agree. It's and again, it's I think big organization, small organization, actually, ultimately, quite often HR aren't consulted until something gets to be a problem. And because a manager has been trying to deal with something on their own and that may be ego driven, that may be fear driven, you just don't know what the motivations are behind that, but it happens. And ultimately, by the time HR involved, it's because it's now a grievance.
Yes.
And we all know where they like to go if in the worst case scenarios, or it's a disciplinary, and then we all know how that likes to go in the worst case scenarios. So it's tricky, isn't it? And I think where you've got really savvy HR teams, they are completely woven in through the business. They have touch points everywhere, and managers they feel okay to just query something when it's even really small.
Yeah.
We're in with the ethos of let's nip this in the bud while and it's not a case of get HR involved and blow it out of all proportion. Let's go and get some advice, and then actually put that advice into practice and be okay, and also be trained, take the coaching, take the mentoring, take the learning from HR teams and learning development teams that are offering it, because that's the way to get around that. But I say it's not everywhere. Not every manager will do that. Not every employee will respond to it, and there will still be, because it's humans, there will still be times when tribunals have their place, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah. And I think with grievances as well, Rachel, it's interesting with those, because actually there's so many. I have a friend in the HR world who runs a mediation company, and there's so many opportunities prior to a grievance arriving for it not to arrive.
Yeah.
There will be cases in every organisation where individuals have just behaved that badly that the formal process needs to take place.
Yeah, that's a disciplinary issue, isn't it? Most of the time, although it may come out of a grievance because it's a conflict, but yeah.
But in a lot of occasions, this is just stuff that could go away. Go away is the wrong word, but actually wouldn't need to get to a grievance if, again, a little bit of a humility on a line manager's side. Didn't realise, I'd caused offence, sorry, that kind of stuff. It goes away. Fundamentally, in most cases, people aren't intending to upset other people. You don't
wake up that morning, do you, and think, I know, I'm going to go and cheese some people off today. That's not, you don't wake up with that intent. It happens accidentally, and then you try and cover it up, and it gets worse and worse and worse, and you end up digging a bigger hole than you can cope with.
Yeah.
And
you don't come out of the business, you don't have one of your staff coming out crying, because they're upset during the day. You don't come out of the business and high five, because like, oh great, I've managed to upset anybody. That's not the way of the world, but equally, people get offended by different things. You could have the same conversation with two different people. One of them takes offense and one of them thinks it's the funniest thing they've ever heard. Yeah. And neither of them are wrong. Neither of them are wrong. But I so often see it where people will turn around and say, well, you've taken that the wrong way, or you've been oversensitive, or all of that kind of stuff. And again, that's not going to help. This is where knowing people as individuals, again, the thing that we started with, comes back in. You will know as a good leader, if you know your team as individuals, what's important to them, what you can discuss with them.
Yeah, and that's how you can best adapt yourself to connect best, isn't it? That's the trick. And you won't know that until you know them. Yes, some people can be quite private, but if they're private, don't risk it. don't be tempted to say the thing you think you're going to say. It's just
I wonder if they are actually that private. I know what, I'll try this. Maybe. Don't do that. Just take them as they are. Because everybody is different. But if you know that somebody on your team follows a certain football team, on the Monday morning, ask them, talk to them about the result, or they watch Grand Prix, or they watch Strictly, whatever it might be. Just find a way of individualizing that person, because that is the golden opportunity that the smaller companies have got that the corporates will never have.
Yeah.
And then that individual goes home at the end of the day and think, do you know what? I matter.
Yeah. Yeah. And do not get me wrong, there's people in corporates that can do that. So corporates can make that happen by enabling their managers at their level, provided their managers don't have teams that are so massive they can't handle them on their own.
Yeah.
I have had conversations with managers where they have, as a coach, I have conversations with managers. Oh, how many direct reports have you got? I've got 25 direct reports.
Yeah.
Like what? Are any of them, line managers of the others? Is this a different structure? And you've got managers of managers? Oh no, they all directly report into me.
Yeah.
I think, wow, how do you get to know? Take you a very long time to have. Yes, you can have a semi-meaningful interaction with them whenever you say hello and all the rest of it. Of course you can start to get to know them, but in that meaningful way, I don't know, it's really hard work, right, to get to know that many people that effectively, and still be their manager, and still do your day job, and still do everything else, and be a human, and have a family, and have a life.
And in the corporate world, typically things like one-to-ones are more regular and are timed and that kind of stuff. And you just then start to, with your example there of 25 direct reports, you're going to be doing one-to-one every day, formally, on top of everything else.
Every working day a month. It's a one-to-one. 25 hours a month. If you're doing monthly one-to-ones, you've got 25 hours going into one-to-ones.
Yeah.
And that's what else do you do? What else is your job? And ultimately, quite often they have a big job to do. They just think, wow. And then there's legit.
Yeah.
I feel for it too.
Yeah. And this is why, this is where, as I say, this is where the smaller organizations have an absolute golden opportunity here.
Yeah. If they got the right our advice, right?
The corporates will always have the benefits and the share schemes and whatever it might be, and you're not going to be able to compete with them.
No.
But you've got a golden opportunity for that staff member to go home and think, my employee cares about me, my employer cares about me.
Do you know what? Here's an interesting one for you. What would you say is the best option for somebody relatively new to HR? So they've been maybe an advisor for a while, or they've been an administrator, they've done their COPD, they're ready for their first advisor or manager role. If they had a choice, an offer from a big corporate or an offer from an SME of 20, 25 heads, which one do you reckon would be the best experience for them as an HR professional?
I think the right thing to do, but I can only go on my own experience, the right thing to do would be to take the role with the SME. Personally, I think in terms of growing, career and experience, I think the more attractive role would be the corporate role.
Yeah, the salary is probably more.
Salary's probably more.
Yeah.
And it's only when you've experienced, I know this is a cliche, it's only when you've experienced being a big part of a small machine rather than the other way around that you actually get that. Because if you go into a corporate, you're thinking foot on the ladder, all of that kind of stuff, and I'll progress up and up. But actually, you've always going to have people that are trying to do the same as you as you're progressing up and up. And in a standalone role in HR, or certainly as a HR role in a smaller organisation, I genuinely believe you can make more of a difference.
I was going to say that. Is it a case of your motivations? If you know your motivations are, actually, I just want to earn as much as I possibly can in a short period of time, corporate all the way. I want to make a difference. I want to impact and influence things. And I want to say that I did it. And I had that role. I played that role in evolving that organisation. Well, that's got to be the SME, right?
Absolutely. And you're not going to be, in taking a HR role in a corporate. The corporate will already have values. In HSBC's case, the values were set overseas as well, because it was this huge corporate.
Huge.
So, whereas if you go into an SME in a HR role, they may not even have considered values. They may not, have thought about mission statements and all of that kind of stuff.
Shared purpose. And it's probably there. It's probably intrinsic, but it's never been.
Yes.
It's never been spoken about. It's never been out there.
Absolutely. And why not go into, why not walk into an organisation that's an SME that's going to be the next Gymshark or something along those lines?
Never know, do you? That's the thing. It's like, you don't know. And if you've been there from the start, what a story, and what a legacy to say, okay, I have been pivotal in helping the leaders of this and the owners of this organisation develop the purpose, the values, the things that we all stand by, the things that we all live to.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. Oh, we could talk all day, I think. I'm really conscious of time. But long and short, I mean, ultimately, we've been talking about this, when you are a small organization, or you are relatively new in HR, or you're new in HR within a small organization, and there's things that are beyond your knowledge, your scope, your capabilities, and you may be the only kind of HR person within the whole organization, and you're pretty new to it. And that's there's a few people I know in that space, definitely, that outsourcing some of the help to a consultancy, getting a consultant in to help you with some of this stuff is really, really sensible. So this is your opportunity here, Andrew. This is our plug your business bit, to just let us know what it is you specifically do. What's your, and also where do martial arts come into that? Should I be careful how I talk to you?
Yeah, it's absolutely. So I think from a HR and from a consultancy point of view, it's my client base as the business grows. It are organisations that actually have got the team in place, or have got employees in place, and they're now starting to think of the culture. They're now, a year, 2 years into business. They know they're good at what they're doing, and they want to grow the business. So the whole "we're not going to last the first year" is gone. That's out of their head. And this is about, we can make a success of what we're doing. We need to grow this business. That's where we need help in. And they're the people that I want to talk to. I want the decision makers. It might not even be the MD anymore. It might be the financial director, whoever it might be, but to do the work around the culture, around retention strategy and succession planning, because they're not things you think about when you're a owner manager of the business and you've only got a couple of employees. You're not thinking about layers and trying to make your structure as lean as possible. You're just trying to get the first couple of years through, the first couple of years of trading. So these are the I want to be I'm targeting the space that I was mentioning right at the start, the bit in between, the 15, 20 heads upwards, up to the point where they've actually got in-house HR. They're the organisations that I'm after, because I think they're the ones that need the help, because they want to get from there to there. And typically that's where, because in that place, it's usually the culture. It's the culture that needs the work to, because you've got the staff, they've worked for you for a couple of years. Are they starting to look at the competition? Are there other things? Because you're still not going to throw money at them. This is where, the salary budgets potentially may not be there, but do you start moving away from statutory holidays to statutory +1? Do you look at your maternity policy? All of these things that suddenly can make you the employer of choice.
Yeah, there's those realistic enhancements that aren't necessarily overly expensive, but mean a lot.
Absolutely, yeah. And if your staff can go home at the end of the day and, as I say, just think, I like where I work, that's such a huge thing. That's such a huge thing. And again, the corporate world was really good to me, and I love being part of it. But a lot of people in the corporate world are there because of the benefits, because the bank had a fantastic pension scheme. I've done some work in the railway industry, and it's a similar, all of that kind of stuff. So the benefits are great. But actually, wouldn't it be good if your employees came to work because they love working for you? And that's the bit I want to be in.
Nice to have both, isn't it? But at the same time, that's not always the case. It's ironically, sometimes the benefits that get you stuck somewhere.
Yeah.
You get stuck in a job, you think, I daren't leave because the benefits are so damn good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I don't like the job.
Yeah. I'm on final salary pension, and I'm 5 years away from retirement.
Yeah.
I can stick this out for 5 years.
Yeah. I'm going to be miserable for 5 years because I know I'm going to get.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I don't like change, so I'm going to stay where I am, even though I'm miserable. I've had a few conversations with clients along those lines, not any lucky enough to be on final salary pension, but certainly in that space where I'm being told I'm crazy if I want to leave. I'm crazy for wanting to leave because the salary's good and I've got a company car and I've got this and I've got this and I've got this, but I'm miserable. Yeah. It's like, well, how valuable is all that stuff to you really, other than what other people are telling you? And it's incredible how much influence the safety and the comfort and the assurance of the niceties can be such a magnet to hold somebody who's stuck in something that at essence, the absolute essence is basically making them ill because they're miserable.
Yes, I mean,
so common.
Great example. I'm under so much pressure at work that I actually got to the stage where I ended up getting signed off from work because I was under that much pressure. But luckily, I've got private health schemes, so I'm getting counselling through work.
Oh, that's all right then.
Yeah, but yeah, that's that side. But look over here.
But you've got to go back, and it's not changing.
Absolutely. But it's almost like I've got private health, aren't my employer great? Yeah, but you were stressed out.
No, if you're a decent employee, you wouldn't need it. Not for that sort of thing. Anyway, you'd need it for broken legs and hip replacement. You wouldn't need it for stress and depression. No.
And you're absolutely right. So but again, that's a benefit that's potentially keeping somewhere. And we are, as always with things like this, it's very easy to generalize, but you can. I know. You can stay somewhere that you don't want to be because it will almost cost you to leave. Yeah, or it will definitely cost you to leave. It's whether you are prepared to pay that price to be happier, content, fulfilled, nourished, and blooming in a good space. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thank you very, very much, Andrew. How can we get in touch with you if somebody wants to get in touch with you via LinkedIn or other platforms? How do they find you? I'm typically, my social media, I tend to be more on LinkedIn than anywhere else. So I'm Andrew Beaumont on LinkedIn. Pop your full link in the show notes just so folks can. No, that's fine. The company's HAB HR consultancy. And you know, obviously there's a website and things, but yeah, typically LinkedIn's the way to go.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. If you enjoyed this and you want to get in touch with Andrew, no, when you admit to yourself that you enjoyed this and you want to get in touch with Andrew, his information will be in all of the show notes. I've been Rachel Woods. This is Andrew Beaumont. We've had a lovely chat, and we think we might have just put the world to rights a little bit today. Do subscribe, and I would love to have you join us for future episodes. Thank you, Andrew, for being a lovely, lovely guest.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.